What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. Now, at the end of this past week, Travis Yost of TSN, one of the hockey reporters there, released a list grading the best defensemen in playing in Canada on Canada's NHL teams. Now, we obviously expected that some of the defensemen on the Toronto Maple Leafs would be higher up in this list, but the overall results here may be a little bit surprising. So, Travis Yost broke this all down based on usage percentage and their GAR percentage, which is goals against replacement, which is essentially a fancy number that determines a metric that determines a value of each player given into one number. Now, this takes into account a ton of things. Well, some of the main things here are going to be even strength goals that they contribute to, their assists, their goals, their power play time, penalty kill time, what they do when they're on the ice during that time, whether they're scoring goals, a part of goals, whether they're getting pluses, minuses, whether they're taking penalties or drawing penalties. These are some of the main things that affect the GAR percentage of each individual player. But ultimately, it is a metric that tries to determine a one single value or one number to determine a value each player brings to their team, given a fancy name of GAR, goals above replacement. So, of his list, and here's some of the most surprising things we're going to find here as we break this one down, is that of all the defensemen playing on teams in Canada, the number one defenseman, Jake Muzzin. Jake Muzzin's numbers come in 77% usage rate, 97% GAR percentage. So, I think that some of this stuff is, you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. It obviously depends on what kind of player they are, the situations that they get put into. Obviously, again, usage, how often they're playing, what types of situations they're playing in, how long of the game they play. All this takes into account. But a guy like Jake Muzzin, who gets some power play time here and there and is a key contributor to the penalty kill, shutting down goals, not allowing goals against, and then at even strength is a major contributor to offense, breaking the puck out, keeping the puck in the offensive zone, and facilitating offense. For him to be higher up on this list, I'm really not surprised. I think his defensive play really stands out, but one of the parts of his games that's really underrated is his offensive ability. Now, what does get more surprising as we break down this list is that coming at number 2 on the list of defensemen is TJ Brodie. Again, he's very similar to Jake Muzzin in types of the attributes that he brings to the game in terms of his creative offensive ability, his puck carrying, his passing, his breakouts, his shot. He can do it offensively. He doesn't score a lot of goals as we saw last season, but he contributes to the offense in ways that not a lot of other guys can do. And then on top of that, he's an incredible defensive player. Playing alongside a guy like Morgan Rielly allows him to focus more on defense and allows Morgan Rielly to try to blossom more of an offensive player like he is. Now, guys in between them here, we're going to go number 3, Jeff Petrie, number 4, Brendan Dillon, 5, Chris Tanev, Dylan DeMello, Artem Zub, Quinn Hughes, and then coming in at number 9, which this may be surprising considering of who he is and what stature he plays on this Leafs roster, Justin Holl. Justin Holl is one of those guys that a lot of people were upset about that they kept him instead of exposing him in the expansion draft, and we lost Jared McCann, obviously. But when you look at these numbers and you look at his GAR percentile, for the stats crowd, they're going to love him. For the non-stats crowd, yes, he's obviously a guy that not the prettiest of players. He doesn't contribute offensively, and we do see some big mistakes out of him here and there. But he is a shutdown defenseman. Playing alongside Jake Muzzin, he's in a shutdown pairing. They play against the top forward lines every single night, and they hold them to as minimal goals as they possibly can on a regular basis. Justin Holl and Jake Muzzin did an incredible job last season when facing guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And then as you move it across the Canadian division, they obviously excelled at that ability of shutting guys down. So Justin Holl being here, I'm not that surprised with his GAR percentile, but for him to be number 9, top 10 in Canada according to this list, I think that's pretty impressive. We have 3 of the top 10. 3 of our 6 defensemen are in the top 10. Moving on, you got Darnell Nurse, 10, Tyson Barrie, 11, Neil Pionk, 12, and then the controversial guy on the Toronto Maple Leafs, number 13, Morgan Rielly. His usage rate is 64%. This is obviously a guy who gets in a lot of situations, but he's not necessarily trusted in the penalty killing role. That kind of goes with the usage rates of Jake Muzzin and TJ Brodie as they get out there a lot. And then as we saw last season with Morgan Rielly losing his spot on the power play to Rasmus Sandin, having TJ Brodie fill in, Jake Muzzin, another guy that filled in there. His numbers, his reliance of how confident the team was in him to put him out in some of those roles really went down and he didn't get used as much. Now, that being said, we did see, and credit to Travis Yost in his article with TSN, he did include the fact that Morgan Riley's defensive ratings, some of the fancy stats, some of the sabermetrics that go along with it, they did improve last season. But we have to credit that more so to TJ Brodie and the defensive style of game TJ Brodie brings and the consistency he brings to Morgan Riley's game. This TJ Brodie being added to Morgan Riley's side is going to immediately bring up the defensive ability of that D pairing. TJ Brodie is a shutdown guy who plays incredible defensively and is going to negate a lot of Morgan Riley's defensive mishaps. If Morgan Riley wants to move up in his GAR percentile, he's going to have to contribute more offensively, whether that be on the power play or at even strength. His point totals were not good enough, especially for a guy who is not incredible defensively. And honestly, more often than not, he's a liability defensively. So Morgan Riley slotting in at number 13 here on this list. It's not that surprising considering the Canadian defenseman and the lack of production or the lack of confidence that most teams have in their defensemen throughout the Canadian division here. It's not like you can look at some of the other teams in this Canadian division or just Canadian teams in general because there's no more Canadian division. But you can't look at those guys on those other teams and say, wow, there's so many guys that should be ahead of Morgan Riley. So him slotting in here, it's not that surprising. But the fact that there are two other Leafs ahead of him, I think for Leafs fans in general, that is a pretty eye-opening number. Now, the guy who slots in right underneath him at number 14 would be Travis Dermott. His usage rate is incredibly low at 18%, but his GAR percentile at 72%, only 2% behind Morgan Riley. Honestly, just to go completely away from the stats here, I think that it's almost projecting him as a Morgan Riley type player in terms of, not in terms of how good he is, but in terms of the style of play he brings, where he can be very incredible offensively and contribute to offense here and there, but he can also be a huge defensive reliability. Now, there's much more to this stat that goes into just power play and penalty kill and how many goals you're on for and goals against. There's a lot more into it, and if you want to look it up, feel free to, because you'll get a way better understanding than what I can possibly give you right now. I'm just giving you the best I can in a brief statement, but Travis Dermott, you can tell based on this number and his low usage rate that on a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, he can contribute and be a very productive, valuable player. If he lowers his mistakes, if he becomes more defensively responsible, this is a guy that could be trusted to be out on the ice and could contribute to this team and make this defensive core significantly better. Only one more player of the 6 on the Leafs here who's not left, who hasn't been in this top 15, and that's Rasmus Sandin. He slots in at number 30 among defensemen playing on Canadian NHL teams. Usage rate of 8% and a GAR of 38%. I think we just haven't seen enough of Rasmus Sandin. We saw a lot of him getting to play in the playoffs where he got penalty kill time, he got power play time, and this is a guy who could be a significant offensive contributor on this team coming up this season, if he can get used to the NHL style of play. Now, I would just want to get away from the grades a little bit because some of these stats, some of these numbers, they can be taken out of context and not looked at in the proper way. Like we have Jake Muzzin and TJ Brodie, the top 2 Canadian defensemen playing on Canadian teams. But Travis Yost put together a list and graded these teams after the fact and had the Leafs as the best defensive core on all the teams playing in the NHL from Canada. He had them graded at an A-, which in comparison, he had the Jets at a B+, the Oilers at a B-, Habs C+, Sens C+, Flames C+, and the Canucks a C. Now, honestly, I'm not overly surprised at this. I'm a little bit surprised at the A-, but I'm not surprised that they're as high up as they are. I could have seen them in a situation where they're tied with the Jets at a B+. I think the Jets' defensive core has been very good. They had some struggles last year where they had a lot of guys coming out and new guys coming in, and they weren't that good, but they got Brendan Dillon at the deadline. They have guys like Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk. This is a team with Logan Stanley coming up here who has promise for a very good D-core despite the fact that they lost a whole bunch of guys in the past couple of seasons. Now, the other Canadian teams here, it's really not that surprising. The Oilers have struggled a little bit defensively. They bring in Tyson Barrie, but he doesn't really change the tide for them in terms of their actual defensive ability. Yes, he's an offensive guy. He can put up a lot of points, and that is very important to a team, but he's not going to blow you away with his his defensive awareness or shut down plays. And then again, you go to the Habs. They lost Shea Weber. They've lost a whole bunch of guys. They don't have very much cap space left right now. Their defensive core is a little bit depleted. I can't look at that Habs team and say, wow, that is an incredible defense anymore, especially considering the loss of Shea Weber. The real number here that is, or value here that is very important and very intriguing is the Leafs at an A-. If this is compared against just the other Canadian teams, I can kind of get it and get along with, yeah, it's an A-. I'm cool with that compared to the other teams in the NHL from Canada. But when you go to grade the overall value of this Maple Leafs team, I'm still not quite there at an A-. I think maybe a B+ would be much more sufficient, especially when comparing it to the other teams in the NHL. I think there's holes here. You obviously have guys who are very strong defensively, like TJ Brody, Jake Muzzin, Justin Hall. But when you look at your depth in terms of Travis Dermott and Rasmus Sandin, these are guys who aren't as defensively responsible, could be liabilities here and there. And then when you look at the one guy who's supposed to be the number one defenseman on this team, and you can often say this guy makes mistakes, he loses us games, I think that that's a problem here. I think that that is a big red flag in terms of the fact that our number one guy can't be relied on in the most important situations on a penalty kill, and he's losing his spot on the power play. I think there are some holes to fill. I think that this is a very good defensive core, but I don't think it's a great defensive core. Perhaps that's what Travis Yost was trying to get at with an A-, saying there's room for improvement, but they're very good. I'm just still not quite there at the A-. Now, Leafs fans, I'm hoping that this rating holds true. I hope that they can improve as the season goes on, and hopefully by the end of this they're at an A+, whether that be through acquisitions or these guys coming to camp ready to go, ready to improve, better than last year, better than they came to camp, better than they left last season off, because I think if they do that, then the defensibility of this team, the overall team defense, will be much improved, will be much more reliable, and I think that this is a team that could do some serious damage considering we have so many offensive threats up front in the forward unit. So, Leafs fans, camp's coming up, more news is coming out, people are getting excited, people are putting out lists, power rankings, polls, whatever the case is. It's getting exciting. We're getting ready for the season to start here. Leafs fans, stay tuned to our channel for more news on the Leafs, more rumors, updates, trades, whatever the case is. But if you like this channel, you like this content, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We'll be back with more. I can't wait to see you guys soon. Leafs fans, keep leafing.